So Jonathan, here we are in a little bit of history actually. We've got this amazing setup as we walk down of all of the various bits of bodywork that's left over from Red Bull racing cars gone past. Yeah. Great memories, and if I look at your journey in the sport, you've been in Formula One for well over 2 decades. You've seen a lot of evolution in the change of pit stops, and you've been involved in some pretty
hairy ones
as well,
yeah,
which we'll get to in a minute. But you know, how do you see that journey? How has that changed over the last 2 decades?
Well, put it this way: I was selected for my first pit stop by the chief mechanic going, "Rear jack." That was based on strength alone. It was Magny Core for my first pit stop in 1991, and I practiced. And the car obviously had no fuel in it. And it came in, I think, quite early on in the race, maybe lap 2, full of fuel, and I was just dangling off the jack. I couldn't even lift the car in the air, so somebody had to come over and do it. So yeah, we've got a little bit more professional since then.
And back in those days, with refuelling, it was what, 10-second pit stops. So there was no real pressure on the wheel gun guys or the wheel changing guys. It was more a question of how long the fuel took.
Exactly, and you know, so the car adapted to suit. The wheels became more difficult to change because it didn't matter. You know, what mattered, it was light and aerodynamically functional. So yeah, it's been quite a journey since then. Really, there's been a huge increase in wheel change times since the refueling era because, as you said, it wasn't really that important back then.
Box and confirm. 15 seconds.
Is it the sort of chicken and egg question, but is it the core of the team of people that you're training first of all to execute a good pit stop, or is it the design of the wheels, the wheel nuts, the guns, the positioning of the car? You know, so basically, is it human performance or is it engineering, which is what Formula One is famous for, which is the starting point?
It's everything. If the driver parks completely out of position, you're not going to get a good pit stop. If the pit crew aren't fit, healthy, well trained and good at dealing with stress, you're not going to get a good pit stop. If the car design is really awkward, you're not going to get a good pit stop. So one of the most difficult things, because we're very big companies nowadays, is to try to make sure that car design doesn't go in a direction that really compromises how fast the pit stop is. But then you don't want to hold, you have to get the measure right. You don't want to hold back the car performance just to get a better pit stop. So that's where you quite often see teams settling at different levels through the season. You know, one team may be 2 tenths faster than another one, or 3 tenths, or something like that. But generally, the scatter now has come down to a much smaller figure.
When you say about the sort of being able to perform under pressure, you know, the stress test of the mechanics, it's too late if you find out during a live pit stop that they can't handle that pressure. And in many cases, you don't find out how someone is going to be until the magic moment. So is it a little bit like you've got human performance guys holding their head underwater, screaming in their ear, you know, SAS style techniques to find out, you know, calling them names to see if they crack under pressure?
No, we're not the CIA. And the name calling happens in the sport, full stop, as you probably imagine. No, we have, you know, I'm not totally comfortable talking about everything we do. We have some pretty advanced techniques for putting the guys under pressure and for helping them to deal with pressure. It does help with a constant practice. The more you practice, I know it's an old saying, but practice does make perfect. And that makes a big difference as well. And I think the other thing is you try to create an environment where they feel comfortable.
The pit element, the whole process, whenever I show a 2-second or a 2.5-second pit stop at a conference or whatever it happens to be, people are just amazed that you can provide that level of customer service. And you know, they're also surprised how a driver or an ex-driver would call it customer service, because they don't tend to think that that's what's happening there. But in terms of other companies taking the lead from Formula One, in how they can improve their processes. Do you have some of your partners coming and saying, well, what is the process? How are you getting it down where you're looking to, if you can improve 1/2 tenth by 1/2 tenth, those are significant gains.
There's a huge amount of interest in the mythology behind what we do. We're a little careful in sharing that, particularly with in any forum where it could come back to hurt us, if you like. But we do try to help. You know, some of the requests are quite from the medical profession, and yeah, I mean, you can't help but think if we can help contribute there, we can help them understand a little bit more about how we train, what we think about, and if you like, all the areas we'll go into to look for perfection. I think that's the thing that comes as a shock to people that aren't in the business. You know, it's just how long you will spend in each area making sure you do the best job you can possibly do.
In terms of the size of the pit stop, from when you were there on a front wheel, you know, as a young, eager mechanic, to where we are now, is a pit crew twice as big as it used to be, or is it, what sort of numbers are we dealing with now?
Well, I think the big difference is nowadays we travel more people to the event. You know, when I first started doing Formula One, there were 25 of us travelling, and that included the chef, marketing, you know, which was one person, etc., etc. And really, in the pit crew, you just had 3 guys on each corner, a front and rear jackman. That was it. As you get more people, you think, well, you know, I could actually have somebody hold the car and stop it wobbling during the pit stop, and then you think, well, actually, I've got 2 more people, so I could put one each side, and one of them could change a visor strip. And then as you travel more and more people, you think, well, let's have a spare guy on the front jack and a spare guy on the rear jack. So it's kind of moved with the fact that teams have got bigger. You know, a pit stop could still be carried out by the same amount of people that we did in 1991, but without a front wing adjust, you know. This is, you know, one of the other things that's quite interesting to come out of the sport. In the refuelling era, you were able to do a front wing adjust with a tool like this, you know, and you had all the time in the world to do it. We actually had to develop tools in order to change front wing angles really quickly in a pit stop.
Well, it's timely that you mention that, but actually there's a front wing sitting here, and one of the elements of the practicing that you do is the ability to change a front wing if it gets damaged. Now, this is going back to the period when I was racing, so I know this is a big old heavy lump because it's full of tungsten and ballast, which you were able to hang at the front of the car in that time. So usually the guy who presented that to the car was, he was the 6.5 foot tall, strong person. With modern Formula One, you're limited on the weight distribution, so presumably the nose now is not any heavier than the carbon fibre that's involved in it. So the person that's responsible for that, it's not about size anymore, presumably, it's just about efficiency of positioning.
Yes, it's about that. It's about, as with every single role in a pit stop, it's about having the right person, the right body shape, with the right movement, doing the correct job at any particular time. Yes, you're quite right. You should be familiar. You smashed enough of those off of cars back in there. Sorry, when you were driving. But you're quite right. You know, it's a totally different piece of kit now. It's much wider. It's prescriptive in a lot of areas. The FIA define the shape of it of a lot of areas. And the guy we've got doing it now is not necessarily the same sort of person that we'd have had doing it back in that era.
The safety of the sport has been something that's been paramount since the early 90s. What seems crazy to me, and thankfully I never raced in Formula One at this time, there didn't used to be a pit limit. So if you were the first crew in the pit lane, you could have a car coming past you at 130, 140 miles an hour. And as we know, some of the drivers of the past have got questionable mental capabilities, so that must have been pretty hairy.
Yeah, I mean, I can still, you don't forget stuff like that. I can still remember 2 big incidents. They both involved John Lacey. The first one, we used to, I think the other thing is, we used to sit in the pit lane all the time. We didn't have radios. Maybe 3 or 4 people in the team had radios, so we didn't know if a car was coming into pit or not. So you would be sat there on a set of tyres. They were cold, but, you know, if it was an emergency, you'd fit those and go back out. I can remember being sat there and watching a Lacey in the Ferrari peel in from the parabolica and come into the pit lane, and I thought, oh dear, what's he going to pick his breaking point? And the other one, the first time that we ever did 10-second penalties or 5-second penalties, they did it in Barcelona at the beginning of the pit lane with no speed limit. So Lacey came past us just snatching 6th gear. He must have been doing, I don't know, 160 miles an hour. It's
just unbelievable to imagine that. Well, the period at which I entered, there was a pit limit of either 60 kilometres an hour or 80 kilometres an hour. So you still wouldn't want to get hit by a car at 80k. But the science of how you prepare for a pit stop, when we've spoken earlier with Gerhard Berger, he was of the opinion that Ayrton Senna was one of the first to really focus on the in-laps, because of course your pit stop time is all very fine and well, but if the driver is slow coming in and slow rejoining and getting up to speed, then that can make the difference between winning and losing. So can you sort of recall any events from your early days of the drivers practicing that, or who was a visionary in that?
Well, we all remember Senna practicing and pushing the limits on absolutely everything. He was my hero when I came into the sport, and he really did lead the modern professional Formula One driver, that mentality of looking for every advantage. I think, I was then fortunate in the early 90s to work with Michael Schumacher at Benetton as well, and then he just took it to another level, and there's always somebody, but I think Senna and Schumacher, names that we talk about an awful lot, and it probably wouldn't come as a surprise to people to know that they were looking at every single aspect of their performance and making sure that they got the best out of it.
Yeah, well, it's been an incredible journey and a fantastic display of what teamwork really is. So I'm sure you're pretty proud of your journey at Red Bull Racing and the way you've led the team. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, DC.
All the best.